Hi everyone and welcome back to Zero to Hero, the challenge where I go from level 1 all the way to keystone hero on my warlock. In the last video I managed to hit keystone master, which of course is 2000 score. So we do have a little bit of way to go, but we are actually getting there to 2500 really soon. But what is ahead of us is actually going into the newer or upper brackets of these keys, right? We're entering what I like to call the big boy keys. So in this video, I would like to talk about my experience with going into the higher keys and maybe give you some insight into what my experience has been like. But first of all, we hit KSM, so that means that we get a token and we get a free tier set, and I managed to get a helm because that was what I was gonna I had the lowest eye level with. Going all the way from 423 up to 426 eye level, which is really great. Going into a whole 17 as the first key of this week. As I mentioned in my last video, I moved my talents around and I started also to get more gear, even though that I pointed out that gear can kind of quickly become an excuse of doing low damage, but I moved some talents around and I got some gear now. I've finally been feeling that I can push myself into the higher keys. That's been the main reason for not doing as high keys as I possibly could have, right? There are times where I would get a 16 or 17 before and I would dim it down because I don't want to go into a key and just completely get absolutely carried, and it did happen before where someone called me out. I was like, damn, well you're doing no damage, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in a 17, it's 412, right? So I wanted to step back, but I feel now I actually finally have that point, I'm at that point where I can actually push further into this content. Now, this whole thing about Mythic Plus having different brackets, the key levels having different brackets, it's not anything new, but it was something that was really highlighted during season 2 because of the crests and what key levels drops different crests and that pulls different kind of people in. But yeah, there are definitely a clear bracket. So you have the keys from I would say 1 till 8, which I would view as the very low keys. And I kind of view the low keys as these are the places where you are really here to learn. If you do a mistake, if there's mechanics you don't interrupt or you don't know about them, whatever, worst case scenario, you personally will die, but then not really much anything else will happen, right? Most of the time you won't even die, you just take a lot of damage, and you're supposed to realize that, oh okay, I'm not supposed to do that, or I'm supposed to do something different. This is also the bracket where you will just get carried. If you have a really good tank or a really good healer or really good DPS, just one person in the group, they actually have the potential to just carry the whole party through it, especially if it's a tank. But even a healer or DPS or just solely prayer can actually keep up a group that's supposed to fail, which sounds really bad, but they can actually in the lower keys support them and carry them through it. After this lower key bracket, you of course have the what I like to call the medium keys, or I view them at least as medium keys, which is the keys, from 9, 10 all the way up to the 11th. Just a disclaimer, you do actually have that weird key the 11th right there in the middle, which is kind of not true. What I'm about to say is because that key is usually filled up with very experienced players and very good players who just wants to get their crest as fast as possible, and that's the most efficient key to do, that key level. So right there, it's possible just to get absolutely carried. And this medium bracket key is honestly the one that's the most frustrating and the most difficult to get out of, in my opinion. At least that has been my experience with this Zero to Hero. Because at least as a fairly as a sole DPS player and someone who's not completely overgearing the content, you kind of don't really have much of a saying in if a dungeon is getting timed or not. To be honest, you can do a lot of things, and I don't want to like, you know, sit here and be like completely like what's the word, like aimless, or like that I can't like help or anything, because there's a lot of things I can do. And in this vortex pinnacle that you're watching right now, we're actually not gonna time this. And even though it's not my fault, there's definitely, you know, a lot of things that I could have done when I look back at it. It's mostly just CC control, but my point was just that when you move into this medium bracket here, you actually feel that like the mechanics becoming more and more important. And as I mentioned before, the influence that one person can have on the group's like experience will definitely like be lowered. So just to like highlight what goes wrong specifically in this dungeon, because I think it is important. This pull right here is extremely dangerous because the mobs cast as soon as if they get off, it's like a huge AoE damage that will like most likely, well, here it does actually wipe the group, and we simply just did not have any CC for it. You saw the warrior actually using his AoE stun right in the middle of the start of the pull. And you know, I look at this and I do have Shadow Flame of Shadow Fury up. I have my AoE stun, I could use that, but realizing it's too late because the healer has already decided that this is not for him. So what can you do besides regrouping and going back and doing the 16? But with what I was talking about before, with these like the medium bracket, in my own personal experience, oh, and by the way, look at this. Look how coordinated our like CCs are, and like how these mobs are not getting any cast through. Like, it's so crazy what difference not a coordinated group, but like just an aware group actually is, and like how big of a life hack that is. Whatever. The point was just that in my own personal experience, this like bracket, especially the 13, 14, and 15s, are definitely the most toxic that I've been in. And the thing about toxic, because in every single bracket, believe me, I've been there. Every single bracket, a key can fail. I have gone in and actually failed a 2. This was actually in Vortex Pinnacle as well, and it was the dragon boss that we just couldn't get through. There's like a different attitude towards failure in the different brackets. Oh, and just before that, it's really funny. The healer actually disconnects right here, and we end up waiting for him to come back. We can see here it's 10 times speed right here, and we just hanging out, just waiting for him to come back. The tank doesn't want to move on because he's really scared that this pack will kill us and we won't be able to, but we actually end up waiting so long that we won't time it anyways, and we're just saying, you know what, screw it, let's just keep going. And we actually end up like doing the whole dungeon without the rest of the dungeon without the healer ever coming back. So we could have moved on and maybe have timed it, but yeah, that's just how it is sometimes. No, what I wanted to highlight was I feel like there's a clear different attitude towards the failure of dungeons. So in the very low keys, people are usually pretty nice about it. People are just like either just, you know, quitting without any like yelling at each other, and that's like, I don't want to like point that out, that like I don't think leaving a key is necessarily toxic. It can be, and that's like my whole point, that it's like it's nuanced. It's not just one thing. Like, it's not just always bad that you leave a key. If a key is going horribly and it's like such a pain in the ass to like get through it, no one is asking you to stay there. Like, please respect your own time and mental health. Don't like, yeah, no, don't. It's okay to leave sometimes. And like in the lower keys, it's just this like, in my own personal experience, it's rare, of course, but like there is just this acceptance of like, oh, okay, GG, we tried, we couldn't, whatever, get into a new key. And in the higher keys, people just usually just leave. It's really rare that like people actually like start abusing. It happens, of course, it happens. It happens in every bracket that there are assholes. That's this part of the game. By the way, look at this huge pull that this tank is doing, and I want to emphasize this guy is really cool because he has really clear communication. And if you are playing as a tank, absolutely communicate to your party. That is the way to go. But when it comes to, and like that's one of my point was just that in the higher keys, people usually just leave. If something happens, if you're not gonna time it, if someone just F's up a mechanic or something like that, they just silently leave, and then that's it. And yeah, you can swear at and think that's annoying, that's fair. I don't necessarily think it's toxic to leave. But in the middle keys here, in this medium bracket, yeah, this is like, people will get really abusive and people will like yell at you and like tell you that you're horrible. And this is the bracket where, and I think it's gonna sound super mean, but the thing about like this bracket is that this bracket captures the people who wants to push into higher keys but can't. And the reason they can't is not necessarily a skill issue. I mean, it is, but like it's not that they don't have the ability to become better. It's that when you die in WoW, and when you F up or you can't like get through something, on like, there's like kind of like two kinds of people. There are people who look inwards, to people who are like focusing on what did I do in this dungeon run, what can I do better. I mentioned that in my tank video a few months ago, that my biggest advice for you was to not focus on the one time that a DPSer ninja pulled for you. Instead, you know, focus on, well, you could have been quicker at picking up the packs, or maybe you saw it and still went forward and pulled more. Like, you know, it's like focus on your own gameplay, focus on yourself. Those people will move on and push into higher keys. Now, the other kind of people are the people who just refuse to look inwards. And they will only see, you know, that, oh, I'm not getting like into higher keys because, well, everyone else is horrible, right? It's also the same, I kind of like, don't want to throw everyone on the same boat here, but I also see the same like talk when it comes into like, you know, I'm not getting into higher keys because there's a meta. And you're absolutely right, and you analyze there is a meta, and it's a really right now in like, you know, 10.7, 1.7, it's a really strong meta with the augmentation, the shadow priest, the fire, all that. It's a really strong meta. But that's not don't be careful not using that as an excuse of like not being able to push into higher keys or have a successful experience with that. If you want to push yourself, like that's what WoW is all about. Like it's a knowledge-based game, and the more knowledge that you have, and especially like that's the key difference. Like knowledge that is like you can do something about. Yeah, you can have a dungeon pool where like the healer just can't figure out how to heal. Okay, but there's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing, so you won't learn from like your mistakes, because trust me, 9 out of 10 times a dungeon can fall apart because of like one person mistakes, but like it's still like he or she is not the only person who did mistakes in that run. Believe me, everyone does mistakes the whole way through. It's really important that you focus on that. And I really think that, you know, this bracket right here, like the 15s and 16s and 17s also, because 17 is the start key to going into the 20s, but I noticed a huge difference going from the 15s, 16s and then into the 17s. Now that also has something to do with, I mentioned before, this like 11 key that's a little bit weird. It's the 17th the same way. It's the easiest way to get the aspect crest. But even then, a 17 still asks you, and you can see right here in the footage, it still asks you to like perfect these mechanics. And if you're not, then you will die and wipe. And this run right here in the Nefarious went really well. We're just not getting through it. For the last boss, like the final boss was the one that kept us, and we just could not get through it. And we ends up actually disbanding, which is really sad. But like you don't really see any, I would call it like toxicity. No one is like abusing each other. No one is like yelling at like, oh, you whatever. I can't say it here on YouTube, but no, people just do the silent leave. And yeah, it's annoying, but it's not really toxic, and it feels like the people here just like on to do better things, whereas the middle bracket right there is like there's a lot of people, I think, who are stuck and they are miserable. And my point was simply just that if you find yourself in that point and you find yourself that, oh my god, Mythic Plus is terrible, because in that key like level, like it kind of is like it's not great. Look inwards. That's my advice, honestly. That don't focus on other people's mistakes, because there's nothing you can like do about that. But all you can do about is your own mistakes. Actually, this dungeon right here, this Nephilim Lair, is actually a prime example of this, and I really no hate to this tank. He was doing amazingly up until this point. So the whole, like, we had a few missed pulls, but the point was just that he is facing every single time the frontal on the pillars. So he's, you know, if you don't know it, he's actually destroying the pillars that we need. Which means that we are wiping like twice, and his, like, the healer is like pointing this out to him. He's doing it a little bit, I wouldn't say rude. It's not like he's calling him names or anything. He's just saying, "Oh my god, tank, are you trolling?" Which of course the tank is a little bit like defensive about. But my point was just that the tank's like point of view from this is that we were really bad at placing the pillars, and that the healer wasn't, you know, good at healing. Like he that was like his point of view. He was like, wow, okay, the healer is like, you know, toxic, because the healer actually ends up just leaving, just in the middle of the run. Like as soon as we wipe here, and as soon as the next one begin, and he destroying the pillar immediately again, the healer just leaves. The tank being focused, and again, I really want to emphasize, no hate to the tank at all. He was a sweet guy, nice guy, but being focused on everything else that you can't do. So yeah, our positioning of the pillars might not be completely optimal, which is a fair point, but that doesn't matter to the tank because he can't do anything about that. What he can do is then he needs to, you know, readjust the frontal so it doesn't hit. You can see right here, it gets smashed. And the healer just, and again, it gets smashed again, and that's where the healer just had enough and decides to just leave. So yeah, with all that like done, I also managed to get my eye level bumped a little bit more by getting enough aspects to craft a belt, a Shadow Flame belt. And I have to say, like, yeah, like that's also like a key importance. When you push into higher keys, you also do have more responsibilities. Don't like, you have, you know, make sure you have the right embellishments. Make sure that you have like the enchants and stuff like that. You need like have healing potions, right? Like especially this comes from like a former hunter main back in like start of Shadowlands. If you're playing a hunter and you don't have a healing potion, you are trolling. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how can you do that? Like, how? Not even like meaning in a mean way. I'm just like, for your own sake, your own fun. Healing potions are goated, like definitely on like a hunter who doesn't really have those like defenses like capabilities. Please make sure that if you're actually going into high keys, you also like, you know, looking up the guides. You're looking up what is required of you. Like you have different. I don't know if the right word is responsibilities, but you do have like, not to like, you know, waste other people's time. Make sure that your character is at the strongest at it as it can get. But if you actually push yourself and you actually have a look in your own gameplay and you look at your own faults more than you start looking at other people's mistakes, you will push into high keys, and what you will find is a really interesting switch. All of a sudden, you will have DPS players who just know the mechanics. You will have tanks who do really interesting but really smart pulls and like routes. That means that like you will not deal with some of the more dangerous ads, or like, you know, you skip a really annoying portion of the dungeon or stuff like that. You will actually have a much more enjoyable dungeon experience because it's being optimized. Because the people that are at this level, especially when you're pushing around the 20s, are people who are competent. It's people who are there, you know, for a reason. You don't just get into the 17s and the 18, 19, 20s by accident. Not to say that it's like requires a huge amount of like, I'm not like trying to oversell it or like, you know, trying to be like ecocentrical or whatever here, but no, you really don't just get into a 20 by accident. And like, don't get me wrong, don't let me like sugarcoat it, right? Because the keys will fail. That's something if you want to like do. That's something I learned really quickly. I've done Mythic Plus for a long time, especially like in the Zero to Hero challenge. Keys will fail. You never know what will happen. Someone will disconnect. Someone will do such an horrendous pull, or someone will do so little damage that you won't be able to get through the DPS check. And this happens at every keys. But as I mentioned before, the attitude in these keys are very different from the different brackets. And pushing into higher keys, it's simply just... What is nice about it is that you kind of know from the beginning, if you know what to look for. The first opening pull is so telling for how this like dungeon will go, right? If you have like 12 deaths and you haven't even hit the first boss yet, you can kind of be aware that like something like this group is not going to go well, and then people might just leave, and then you saved for struggling for 40 minutes. And this is me, by the way, going into and making sure that I get all the enchantments, because this is something I mentioned before, something I honestly forget that I have. I'm like, oh shit, right, yeah, you need to do that. And actually is really important, because it does actually give you a quite increased like boost in your damage. So definitely, if you haven't yet, look up on Wowhead your enchantments and like, you know, get to it, like get your character at its like strongest point. But yeah, definitely push yourself into these like, you know, higher keys, because for me personally at least, this is where the Mythic Plus like really shines. It's also really interesting because like the difficulty of the different dungeons, are like what dungeons are viewed as difficult will also change depending on what like, you know, key level you do. Now, like something like Dragonflight, and yeah, actually, you can actually view it if you look at my like, you know, my first, I think it was the second episode going into Mythic Plus. Dragonflight was a dungeon that I was incredibly fearful of, and that's because that dungeon actually like asks you to know which mobs you need to interrupt, like, you know, the fear. It also like asks you, at least with like routing and stuff like that, asks you to do some skips and like, you know, skipping like invisible mobs that people can't see. And if you don't do this, then, well, you know, you will most likely wipe, right? Because if you don't, someone pulls the invisible mobs and then run throughout the whole dungeon with them, well, that whole like the rest of the dungeon is gonna snap on the last boss, and that's not gonna be fun. So that was like a dungeon that I was like really struggling on, like in pucking and in the very lower keys. And then now in the 18th, like that, Dragonflight is super, super easy because everyone knows those things. Everyone knows what to watch out for. Something like Alderman and, Alderman is like a good example because there's so much damage here that it is avoidable, like the totem class. But there is also a lot of things that's like not avoidable that you need to like just be aware of. And I remember like, you know, tanking in the start of... this is actually a good example right here. This is PSA. If you can't follow along, like if you see the tanks like skipping something and like a patrolling ad, you can't stop. Just stop, wait, and then when you can then move on. Like I have seen so many people just saying, you know what? No, F this. I'm just gonna follow the tank. I'm just gonna pull the exit. No, please don't do that. It's fine. It's totally fine, and everyone will love you for just waiting a few seconds and then like going here. And then we're talking about awareness. Be aware of the frontal. This is something, again, like, you know, you just learn these things by doing the mistakes. So also don't be too hard on yourself if these things happen. But yeah, it's interesting how the dungeon dynamic does change. And specifically, I notice a lot from like the tanking, that there are mobs where casters, for example, will be fine, you don't really have to deal with them, and then all of a sudden you go into higher keys in the 20s and 21s maybe, and all of a sudden like these random bolts of something, shadow bolt, firebolt, will just like one-shot you if it gets off, right? So there's like a lot of like, so the dynamic of the dungeon does actually change on the different like key levels that you're doing. I think honestly what's like catching my attention when it comes to like pushing into higher keys is simply just the fact that like they force you to be aware of the dungeon's different mechanics, and it's forcing you to actually perfect them. Because if you're not perfecting them, then they will kill you, and you will most likely not time it or not complete it or like whatever. Pushing into high keys, you have, as I mentioned, like these situations where things will just all of a sudden like one-shot you, and you need to be aware of these things. You need to know how to deal with these different things. But when you actually do, when it all clicks and it all just falls into place, it is one of the most satisfying experiences, because you really feels like you're just mastering this dungeon, and you can feel how long you come from not knowing what to kick in the beginning of a season to all of a sudden knowing exactly what the tank is gonna pull and where, and understand why he's doing those things, and why the different boss mechanics are doing the different things, and like just absolutely mastering a dungeon is incredible feeling. And you really first get that satisfaction, in my opinion, when you actually in the situations where they actually force you to do it, where it's like if you don't do it, you will fail miserably. So yeah, else it has been quite good. As I mentioned before, I did a lot of keys this well, I actually haven't done a lot of keys, that's actually wrong, but like over the last few weeks I have, and I did notice that like it's also been a little bit frustrating, especially like pushing into the 17-18s, because before that you have a lot of keys that just falls apart, and then you just left with a 16 instead, and then you just have to like push that up. Sometimes it feels a little bit like meaningless, or just like, you know, it's like, why keep pushing when it's just gonna fail. But like when you actually do have the success stories, it's actually really great. And I definitely have been having more success rate as soon as like I push above the 15-16s keys. So I definitely think that the Keystone Hero is really not that far like off at all. So yeah, this last key, Nefarious here, pushed us into 2338. So almost 150 points away, 160 points, right? Away from 2500. Which I honestly think is really great. So I could definitely have done this quicker if I had all the time in the world. I could just like play it. Like usually, you know, because I believe this is going to be my 4th character this season that I got to Keystone Hero. And usually you can do it really, really quickly if you just like have one week where you just make sure everything gets to like 13, 14, and then the next you can push into 17, 18. So you can basically do it in like 3 weeks. But like because of like playtime and stuff like that, I haven't been able to do that. But I think I'm actually like, it's been a fair and a quite good run. And we are also getting more and more geared. I do it just like, I might point in the next video as well, but that's a bigger point. But I really just want to point out that gear is kind of bullshit. And with that I mean, like, at least from my opinion, I have this like consensus that like I need to be a specific high eye level before pushing into keys. No, this 430 is more than plenty. Like you have more than enough damage to push into these higher keys. Like it's you don't need to be over geared to do these things. Honestly, you really don't have to. So yeah, getting along really, really well. I am so happy that you guys have been seeming to like enjoying this series. A little bit sad that it's coming to an end, but season 3 is coming soon. So you know, hopefully another definitely another Zero to Hero is gonna come along when that is like coming out. Thank you so much for watching, and take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.